Hey folks, welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you being here as always. Thank you. If you're here after last week's episode with Anti-Flag, thank you so much to everybody who listened to that. I really, really appreciate it. That interview was a great thrill for me. I've been a fan of them for so long, and it was absolutely amazing to get to sit and talk with them. So that was a dream come true. So thanks to everyone who listened and shared that with people. I really appreciate it. My guest on the show this week is a local comedian, improviser, stand-up comic, Nick Cohen. Nick, I met, podcaster also, because he hosts the Serial Thrillers podcast with former guest Paul Cohen, and I was a guest on that show. I talked about my childhood while eating Trix cereal, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. Nick, I met doing tech for shows at the People's Improv Theater here in New York City, and I was doing tech for a show that he was in, and then we started working together on shows, and then I did he and Paul Cohen's podcast, Serial Thrillers. Serial Thrillers. I think I said Serial Killers earlier, but I meant Serial Thrillers. And it had been a while, but I wanted to get him on the show, and we had a really nice chat. He has a background in music that I was not aware of, and we had quite an interesting chat about his history studying music. So it was that kind of thing that I can't plan for, that I just love, that comes up when I interview folks. So this is a pretty fun episode. If you enjoy this, or if you enjoyed any of my recent episodes and you think you might have a friend who will enjoy the show as well, we are available everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you want to leave a rating or a review, or just let a friend know that this show exists, I would greatly appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you guys for listening. And you can find me on Twitter at Comic Will Carey. And if you want me to come do stand-up in your city, let me know, and let's figure out a way to make that happen. And thank you guys again for being here. This has been a really crazy year of podcasting, and I've had some really thrilling moments, and I've had some really great conversations with people that I know and admire. So thank you guys for being here. And let's go to my chat with improviser and comedian Nick Cohen. Here's what I'm going to do now. Since we just started recording, this is the educational portion of the show, because I want more people to make podcasts better. So basically, I have my audio interface, and I have two microphones plugged into the USB port, and then this gives me the option in GarageBand to select input 1 for the track I'm on, and then input 2 for the track you're on, and then I go to I go to the track settings, and I show the record enable button, and then I hit record. So that allows both to record at the same time.
That's really interesting. I don't know. My mixer that I use, I've spent so long trying to figure it out, but it keeps just recording into one track.
Oh, really?
But now I'm using the professional studio setup, so I don't really worry about it as much.
Yeah, exactly. The professional studio setup is nice. The Scarlett, I think it's a 2i2. I got this. This is like B stock, so it's like cosmetic. It works, but there's like a little nick on this side, and it's like $140. Super easy. I use it for music all the time also.
Yeah. Is it just 2-channel?
Yeah, it's just the 2 channels. They make ones with more channels, but I figure until I'm setting up a recording studio in my apartment, I'm good with just the 2 channels.
Right. That's fun.
So, yeah. I wanted to ask you this, because we both landed in the podcasting realm creatively. Was this ever, this idea or like radio ever on the horizon for you when you were younger? Because it wasn't for me.
No. I would say I always wanted to go into film. I would say especially in like high school and even in college, I started out as a film major.
Right.
And I was probably like an early listener to podcasts. Like I remember like 2006, 2007, like very early, like Stuff You Should Know, Grammar Girl, like all that, like super early stuff back in the day. But it never really felt like anything I really wanted to go into. I was always a musician as well.
Oh, really?
So I was,
what do you play?
So in college, I played trombone and piano. And then I was actually a composition major in college, so I studied to be a composer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so music was always, music and sound and organized noise, however you want to define it, was always something I was interested in. But I would never say like radio or podcasting was anything specific that I was drawn to.
Gotcha. I kind of feel the same way. Like to me, the idea of of being on the radio was like the modern. I have two templates for radio. I have like the modern rock radio station drive time kind of guy, the like WBL that guy, that sound, and then from sixth grade to senior year of high school, I took the bus every morning and took the bus home. And in the mornings, we would listen to the Russ Parr Morning Show with Olivia Fox, which was a very, very popular black morning show.
Okay.
And so I'd listen to like, gospel in the morning, hip hop and R&B and like, they would always do bits, have someone call in and do like a wacky character or something. So that was my other idea of what a radio show was.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember as a kid, like listening to Radio Disney and wanting to like, I don't know. There's something about that kind of drew me to it. Like the hosts always seemed like they were having so much fun, and I loved all the music.
Yeah.
But no, it never really, came across as something that was interesting to me. Even when I started listening to podcasts, it was still always like, oh, that's like a neat form of entertainment. But I don't feel like it's going to have any major impact on my life.
Sure. I remember like the first podcasts I listened to, like I didn't even know the tech ones or the Grammar Girl ones. I knew Smodcast. So to me, a podcast was two guys get stoned and ramble about stuff.
Which it definitely still can be.
Yeah, 100%. And then I discovered Mark Maron and I found his Carlos Mencia episodes and I was like, holy shit, this is what a podcast can be too.
Yeah.
I want to listen to more of this. But I always wanted to like hear. I always wanted to be in a band too. So like music was the thing. Like music and theater were my two things. So you were a composition major. So that means specifically songwriting.
So it was more for like classical composition.
Classical composition.
Yeah. So the goal when I was in college was to become a composition professor someday and to write, orchestral music and chamber music and choral music. And that was pretty much what I was set on for almost my entire college career. And then towards the end, I kind of started to feel like I wasn't, and this is a theme that I'm sure will come back later, but
sure,
that my artistic action wasn't lining up with my artistic mind, and that I was making things that didn't feel authentic to me. And it kind of sent me down a path of a lot of conflict in figuring out, is it something I actually want to keep doing, or is it something I'm doing because I'm doing it?
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. And I feel like classical music specifically, similar to jazz in that you have to have a real passion for that style. Otherwise, it probably feels like a job.
Yeah, and I think part of it too, especially with music is one of like the last few things you can study, especially in college, that's really built on like a master and apprentice model, where like you have your professor who teaches your instrument or your craft, and you will study with them for all 4 years in a one-on-one environment. And if you don't match up with that professor for whatever reason, maybe you have different philosophies, maybe you don't always agree with their style, maybe you don't interact with the art in the same way that they do, it can be pretty debilitating in terms of your artistic sense. When suddenly the person who's supposedly guiding you throughout your journey, you feel like you're not in the same page. It's not conducive to your artistic making abilities.
Totally. I had that in bands a lot. Like if you're in a band with a bunch of different people and you all don't want to play the same kind of music, it gets frustrating very quickly. Cause I was a lot of times like, I always wanted to play with and write like pop punk songs. And a lot of times most of my friends were metalheads, and I like metal, but I wasn't as proficient or interested in the kind of metal they wanted to do. So there was always like butting of heads in that kind of thing. Not in like a negative way. It's just in a we've got to go find our crews so we can do the thing that we're burning to do.
Right.
Which sounds like it's a similar thing that you were kind of going through.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I always hesitate to use like the term bad thing in terms of anything that's artistic, because I don't think anything in artistry is bad.
Sure. It just wasn't your thing.
Yeah, I wasn't aligned with what I was doing.
Hmm. Are there like, and because I'm kind of curious about this. Are there like like 101s of composing classical music? Because I always imagine it being like a different thing. Like I imagine songwriters like sitting down with a guitar and going da 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 da, strumming some chords. But when I think of classical music composition, I think of the movie Amadeus and someone like tearing their hair out with a sheet music, like writing notes on like a Every Good Boy Does Fine on the music, and it's just like no.
I mean, I think it's the same way. We overuse the term classical music in society to mean a lot of different things. And, there's the classical music like Mozart and Bach and Beethoven.
Yeah.
And even then, the three of them wrote in vastly different time periods and different styles of music.
Right.
But in modern day, with very neoclassical music, not even neoclassical, I'd say like post-minimalist, there's all these different terms going on now.
Sure.
But it's music that has been inspired so much by what's been going on in rock music and pop music, and so many composers these days are influenced by people who were doing traditional songwriting in the 60s and 70s, that there's starting to be more of a confluence between pop and classical. So you start to lose kind of the distinctions in some ways. And a good example is like Tom York of Radiohead, who does some things that you could definitely classify as classical music, whereas you find some classical composers that do some things that you might say maybe this is pop music. So I think it's important to make that kind of distinction first of all, because
Sure.
I think it's easy to lump a lot of things together. But in terms of like starting out, it's really about, you have to understand music theory. And
Right.
it's something that as you learn music theory and as you learn like the basic building blocks of why we like the music we like, like why do certain cadences sound good? Why do certain harmonies sound good? Why do certain melodies sound good? Then that really gives you the tools to start opening up your toolbox and building out your own music.
Yeah, totally. Like I figured out 1-3-5s, like the root of fifths, and just kind of the idea behind why this chord like G sounds good going after D, and then if you want to go after A, it sounds like that, and then you like how to resolve things, and then like those minor pentatonic scales, like you can go like, and then that sounds cool.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because especially the more you're conditioned to the sounds of Western music, the more you kind of discover stuff on your own when you start out. Like I remember in high school, playing things and being like, oh, this sounds really good, but I don't know why. And then you start studying it formally and you're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Like this is the research that backs up why something that I thought sounded good, does sound good traditionally. And the thing with music theory that's interesting too is it's not like we invented music theory and then invented music.
Sure.
Music theory is the analysis of music that's already been created. So like Bach didn't know music theory, but when we analyzed Bach, we came up with all these different rules and tenets that defined why his music sounds good. And so after every generation of composers, we actually go back and, the definition of music theory changes because it's a reactionary form, a reactionary study to the music that came before it. And so you can look at music theory and, use the tools and techniques to start writing new music, but everything you write is then going to be reanalyzed into this new definition of music theory.
Right. And Bach probably wasn't going, okay, well, I'm going to put an A here and then I'll put the fifth here. He probably wasn't doing that. He was, I imagine, he was probably just like, I like to imagine Bach just sort of like at the piano, like, no. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is the same way that like authors write books is, they're not thinking like, oh, I should write this word and then this word comes after and then this word. It's once you have language ingrained in your brain so specifically, sentences just naturally flow out.
I kind of want to. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And then like the revision process, and then like, okay, not this. What if I did it like this? Just the endless workshopping of it. I kind of want to trace this idea. Can you think of was there a specific moment for you where you were kind of set on this path initially? And I don't know where, I don't, like, you are in that group of my circle of friends where, like, I feel like I know you, but I don't really know you.
Okay.
And I say this to almost everybody.
Uh-huh.
Because you feel like you know comics because you see them on shows or you know they're acting.
Right.
You don't really. Like, where are you from?
Yeah, so I grew up in Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Yeah, I was born in New Hampshire, but lived in Phoenix from when I was 2 until 22. So spent most of my childhood there. Went to school down in Tucson, University of Arizona. Bear down, go Cats.
Right on.
Yeah.
So Phoenix, what's kind of the general vibe in Phoenix? Because my idea of Arizona is like a lot of turquoise jewelry, and I know that I've heard of Tempe and I know Tucson, but I don't know much about what Phoenix is like.
Yeah, so I grew up in the suburbs of Phoenix. What's interesting about Phoenix is it's the 6th largest city in the country, and most people don't realize that. But like,
I didn't.
I mean, it's like New York, LA, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix. Yeah, I mean, it's up there with a lot of the big ones. And Phoenix really had a boom in like the 90s where the city expanded rapidly. There's a lot of construction, a lot of development. So even when I go back to areas where I grew up as a child, I see, so much more development and houses and buildings and things like that. It's kind of hard to describe what it's like for me just because it's so much of what I grew up used to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's big open spaces, it's mountains, you can see the sky for miles, dust everywhere.
Yeah. Desert.
But in a lot of ways too, it's the suburbs, like growing up, I imagine it was like the suburbs pretty much anywhere else in the country. Weather was probably a little bit different, but, it's pretty standard.
Yeah. I think of those, that is really the case because I feel like there are giant chunks of the United States that feel exactly the same as other giant chunks of the United States outside of major cities. I don't know if that hasn't always been the case when in my experience traveling, like even like small funky towns in like internationally or even like Japan or Thailand feel nothing like anywhere else in that I've been in those countries.
Yeah.
Like they feel, but there's just like this relentless homogenization of the non-major cities of the United States.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things like where you watch any movie that's like set in the suburbs and you kind of think like I could picture this in any suburban area in the country just with slightly different weather.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Like I get nervous about California because like so much of California feels like really calm and suburban. Like once you get outside of Los Angeles or San Francisco, like outside of the big cities, I'm always just like, oh, it feels too quiet. or like Long Island, I feel the same way. I'm like, oh no, it's gonna trap me.
Yeah. Did you grow up in a city?
No.
Okay.
I realized recently, I think I grew up like one step from being off the grid.
Okay.
Like I didn't even, where I grew up is technically called a suburb of DC. It's about an hour south of Washington, DC. So like my neighbors were like lobbyists and stuff. Or lots of people that worked for the local government or for the school system. But like, I never thought about like, we weren't on the public water system. We had we had like a well, and we were at the very end of like not a gated community, but an established community. Like, and like and my house is like overlooking St. Leonard Creek, which is where a battle of the War of 1812 was fought. So I really feel like, and then like we didn't have cable for like most of my high school years, and like we didn't get a computer until like I was almost like a freshman in high school. So I realizing now like I was just out there in the woods kind of like one step before like one step. I feel like one step before like just going truly like cutting the phone lines basically is where I'm from.
Okay.
So I got lots of most of like the culture I got exposed to was, through I got really into music and trying to find stuff about that and like the books I would get if we went to Borders or something like that. So, very rural kind of growing up experience for me.
Got it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And how many siblings did you have?
I have one older sister.
One older sister.
Yep.
Okay. And okay. And so and you're the younger. And what did your folks do?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I really think I had like a very straightforward childhood. Yeah, my dad worked in sales for a long time. My mom worked in PR and marketing. I had a 2-story house, brick fence, dogs, cats growing up. It was to me very typical of
Yeah.
what you kind of think of with a nuclear family.
Yeah, the dream
Yeah.
that we're all taught to chase. So I know there's weirdness in here somewhere. We don't end up being creative people without a little bit of weirdness, but that is kind of the setup that I feel like that's the ideal, or was the ideal for a long time, that you're kind of taught to chase. So you're growing up in this prototypical American suburban experience. And then when does the seeds of music get rooted?
I would say for music specifically, it was kind of always there.
Yeah.
In the sense that I started piano lessons at a young age. By the time I was in elementary school, I was playing the cello for a couple years, and then started playing the tuba and eventually the trombone. And I think it was one of those things where it kind of came naturally to me. So,
Sure.
Something where I didn't necessarily have to I didn't have to practice to be good at it.
Yeah.
And then high school hit, and it was the same thing. All my friends were band kids, so it was easy just to stick with it and keep going. And then when I got to college was the time where it was like, oh, I can't keep coasting anymore. I actually need to put in the work if I want to succeed.
Yeah, that's a real steep jump.
Yeah.
I found when I was going to a freshman in doing theater, is they really they put you through a lot to weed out people who aren't serious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, did you have any is there like a whiplash for piano? Like, is there like a J.K. Simmons who's just like yelling at you for like getting the wrong key?
Definitely not for piano. No, because I think so much of it too is once you get to a certain level, it's not about like hitting all the notes. It's about interpreting the music in a way that is satisfying to the expectation of the audience, which is just a fancy way of saying like playing musically.
Sure.
If you miss one note to make an entire phrase sound musical, then it's not as big of a deal.
Yeah. It's because you get into being about feel.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
It's like a bird that flies over the field and ignores all the individual trees underneath it.
Because you're knowledgeable of music theory, do you find it hard to listen to pop music or like simple rock and roll? Because you're just like, oh, it's so easy. I can't. Because I know lots of like music performance studies people who are like, just, oh, this is just so easy. I can't enjoy it.
I don't know if I necessarily approach it like that. I think a lot of the music I listen to is I listen to like a lot of drone music, a lot of like minimal music.
Oh, cool.
That's very technically simple and straightforward, but just executed in a really artful and interesting way. So I don't see complexity as a good thing in art. I think complexity gets in the way a lot of the time. So I'm totally down for simple things. I can't say I'm a huge fan of a lot of pop music, but I don't know if it's necessarily because of that specific reason.
Sure. I'm kind of the same way. Like I'm chasing a very specific sound that got me excited when I was like 13, and I'm always interested in chasing bands that make me feel that same way.
Yeah.
That same sense of discovery and excitement.
Right. And I think especially in this day and age with Spotify and Pandora have like completely revolutionized the way that we find new music and discover content. And it's so interesting, like looking at my top songs on Spotify from like 2017 versus 2018 versus now, and just seeing kind of this natural transformation of what I've been listening to and the ways I've been listening to it and discovering new artists and who kind of sticks around and what's new basically in my listening ecosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. I like doing that too. I'll like following all of my different phases, and then also seeing like what Spotify recommends me based on like the one song I I start with.
Oh yeah.
That kind of stuff I find really interesting. So you're talking about like minimalist stuff. So that makes me think of like Brian Eno,
Yep.
like ambient.
Yeah.
I love kind of like ambient, like spacey kind of instrumental music.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Eno really kicked that whole movement off, and it's something that there have been so many great artists and musicians who have continued to kind of evolve that space over the years, and it's still growing. But even like Brian Eno came out of this world of what was going on in classical music in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and looking at composers like Philip Glass and John Adams and all these different guys who were Terry Riley, all these different voices back then in the musical sphere, I think kind of allowed Brian Eno to do what he did in reaction to them. And,
Sure.
It kind of set up this whole new world of ambient and drone music.
Yeah, I love this stuff. Have you ever heard of a guy called the Album Leaf?
No, I haven't.
His stuff, he has a couple songs that have words, but the majority of it is kind of like ambient instrumental electronica, and I really enjoy it. I think there was a pretty popular song that was used on Damages.
Okay.
So I would definitely recommend that if you're into like sort of like ambient kind of atmospheric stuff. It's stuff that I would use if I was scoring like a lo-fi like indie romance.
Yeah. I'll check that out.
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think for me it's finding especially organic music in the sense of music that draws from nature and uses organic sounds. And I don't know, I think it's so creative, and the more that we can draw from nature itself, I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. So do you mean like incorporating like cricket sounds into a song, or
not necessarily like as straightforward as like cricket sounds, but maybe you've recorded ambient noise of Central Park on a summer day, and you kind of work in electronic music or acoustic music that maps back to the sounds that you've recorded. So it's taking almost a seed of an organic experience and then applying music to heighten that experience in a sense. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. The first thing I thought of when you said that, because you're essentially it's like you're doing a remix of an organic source.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it reminded me of this interview with Mike from the band Linkin Park. So he's like the rapper, and they have a DJ in the band also. So they would never like sample other music. They would do like random like experiments and press sound on the vinyl and then work that into the songs. So that's immediately what that reminded me of.
Yeah, and there's a whole genre too. It's just called noise music, which is just music of things that would generally be considered noise that are reworked into something that maybe has some melodic or harmonic principles. At the end of the day, music is just organized sound, and sound is just pleasant sounding noise.
Completely.
And so it's really interesting just to see it broken down to like what is the basic unit of music and how can we use that to create new aural experiences.
Exactly. Like how far can we stretch this and still call it music?
Right.
Yeah.
It's like that, pornography when you see it. What's that Supreme Court thing?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was, I think in the 80s, that was the defense of pornography, or not. Someone was trying to define what pornography was, and someone just said, I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
And I think the actual legal definition of pornography is something, and this according to a Bill Hicks routine, is something that has no artistic merit and causes sexual thoughts. And his punchline was couldn't that just be every commercial ever? And then his whole thing was eventually they're just going to have a commercial with a naked woman, like, spread eagle, and then it pulls back and just says, drink Coke.
Okay, yeah, so music is that. Yep.
Yeah.
I stand by my analogy.
When you really break it down.
Right.
And then so you're fully entrenched in this world, and then you realize this is I'm not doing what I really want to. I'm not making the sounds I really want to make. And then how did you how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got into just a really bad artistic funk my senior year of college, and got a case of senioritis and kind of just wrote it out.
Sure.
And eventually started pursuing other artistic avenues. Got really into photography, which I still do pretty often, and then eventually into the world of comedy. But I really think of it as there's kind of this creativity that flows through us, and throughout our lives we find different ways to manifest it and to put it out into the world, but it's still the same underlying current that's always with us.
Yeah, I agree with that. The like I know so many people who's I knew when I was starting in stand up. We've all kind of branched out and are being creative in different ways as well. It's like all finding like what is the avenue.
Right.
Which that journey I find very intriguing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to trying to tell a story, and it's, some people tell stories through words, some people tell it through music, some people tell it through comedy, some people tell it through painting, some people tell it through art. There's all these different ways to do it, and it's just figuring out what makes the most sense for you in the moment and what feels the most comfortable.
Yeah, and then did you have an interest in comedy the whole time, or did that come later? Because I didn't really know what stand-up comedy even was until I was in high school, and then didn't get really into it until college.
Yeah, so I was a huge stand-up fan pretty much starting in middle school. Like, I remember staying up late to watch Comedy Central Presents. It was like the highlight of my day. There's so many comics who I fell in love with around that time, and it got to the point where I memorized their routines, and I would say it to my friends at school, and we would all laugh. And I pretty quickly realized, especially in high school, that I just really liked making people laugh. I didn't end up doing much comedy in high school and college, just because I think I was a little scared and I was really busy with music stuff, and it was easier to not do it than to take a risk.
Sure.
But definitely the interest and the passion was always there from a pretty young age. Yeah.
Awesome. And what do you remember any of those Comedy Central presents you saw?
Yeah, so Mike Birbiglia was the big one way back in the day before he completely blew up.
Before I remember that one, even before he kind of found the storytelling form.
Yeah, it was pretty much straight stand up.
Yeah,
and it's so interesting going back and listening to that after I've probably seen him live almost a dozen times at this point. Nice. And it's just such a different, it's so different, but it still works for him, So Mike Birbiglia was a big one. Eugene Merman, who has found, definitely found some good opportunities in the...
Well, Bob's Burgers is just such a well-written, funny, smart show. And his stand-up was always I always loved his stand-up.
Yeah, it's so surreal, and just like the things he talks about are so out there. And I remember on one of his specials he talks about how he got like a parking ticket, and then he wrote a letter to the city, and then like took out an ad in a newspaper with like this ridiculous letter, and it's just so fun. It's so wacky, and I think I kind of connected with that, just total non sequitur humor in a way.
Oh yeah.
Kyle Cease was a big one for me, who was a really great stand-up and then kind of moved into like the motivational speaker world.
Yes, he did.
But he was, I've probably watched him more than anyone. And he actually had a thing one time when I was in high school where you could tweet him your phone number and he would call you and test out a joke on you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so he did that to me one time, and he called me and he said a couple jokes and, asked for my thoughts. And it was the coolest thing that ever happened to me when I was in high school. And then I remember like a year later, his special came out and there was a version of that joke on there.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was a really great thing.
That's really cool. I wonder some comics should do that again. That's a really interesting idea. I've got a couple of fun Eugene stories. One time I saw him at the Bell House. I think he was getting ready for his hour special, what would be his hour special, and he had the bit where he had painted a bunch of different absurdist paintings, and he actually like sold. People in the audience bought them off of him after the bit for like $100 each, and he was just like, "Oh, people told me art was hard." and then my favorite Eugene story is it was like the 4-year anniversary of his show he used to run at the Bell House. This is back in like 2010. I think I'd been in New York City for like a month, and I went to the show, and he did a bit early in the show about, he was hosting. He did a bit about taking his. He was at Comic-Con. He took his lamp apart and brought the parts home with him, and he was gonna. Someone in the audience could win the lamp later on in the show, and then he held up like some sour candies from London. It was like, if someone can keep this in their mouths for 30 seconds, you win the lamp. And no one volunteered, and I was like, I'll do it. So I went up with Huge, and I put the candy in my mouth, and I was like, it wasn't like, it was like a Sour Patch Kid. And I have a G.I. Joe lunchbox signed somewhere with Eugene Merman's lamp.
That's so cool.
That was fun. I was like, all right, all of my dreams of what comedy in New York is like were real, because I had been used to performing in like sports bars for like disinterested football fans in the suburbs of Baltimore for a long time. So that was really, really cool.
Yeah, he's one of those comics I've never seen live, but I would love to so much. I'm such a big fan of his.
Yeah, I don't know if he's toured recently, but he should. I know his comedy festival, Janelle James, does now. But I imagine you'll get a chance to see him again.
Eugene, if you're listening, please do a show.
Yeah,
I want to come see you.
Eugene Merman, do a show so Nick Cohen can buy tickets.
Thank you, Eugene.
I will buy tickets as well, because I haven't seen you in a while. Also, my third day in New York, I bought a ticket to go to comics, and the show was Andy Kindler and Eugene Merman, and then Jim Gaffigan did a guest spot. Dan St. Germain was the MC.
Okay.
It was
yeah. Your third day in New York?
Third day in New York City. I ran into Joe DeVito also, who's another comic, well-known comic in New York. He's been on Last Comic Standing and stuff. So that was, again, one of those like, whoa, the big city.
Yeah.
And then how did you get to New York from Arizona?
Yeah. So when I was graduating college, I knew I wanted to go to a big city. I didn't really care where. I just knew I wanted to get out of Phoenix. And I was actually applying for a job with the LA Philharmonic, and got to the final round of a role out of like 400 people. And it was for a position in their education department, and didn't end up getting it. And it had been like this 3-month process, and it was like super disappointing.
Oh, that sucks.
But I knew I still wanted to go to a big city, and so I was applying for things all over, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, LA, and nothing really came through. But I ended up getting a job at Arizona Opera. They were hiring a marketing assistant, and I had a little bit of marketing experience and the music experience. So ended up taking that and fell in love with opera, and had a really great experience there. I was in a relationship at the time with my college girlfriend. She was a couple years younger, so we were still together even after I graduated. And then about a year after that, we broke up, and I kind of felt like I didn't really have a lot left to do in Arizona after that.
Right.
And so I said, why not try and make the move again now?
Sure.
And my sister had just moved to New York a few months before, and I came out and visited, and then just started applying for jobs. And randomly, the first job I applied for is the one that hired me all the way across the country. And it was with a small tech startup doing like some very basic marketing things for them. But it got me to New York. So about 3 weeks after I started looking for something, I already had an offer.
Oh, that sounds great.
It's insane. And then like I have people ask me like, "Oh, do you have any tips?" Like, and I'm like, I have no tips. Like, I just got insanely lucky.
Yeah, it's a lot of luck and then a lot of persistence. Like I've applied to so many jobs before I landed where I am, and then I worked so many crappy jobs.
Yeah.
So it's if anyone tunes into the show for career advice, persistence and friendliness. So, and then when did you get to New York?
So that was September of 2015.
Okay.
I flew out Labor Day weekend.
Nice.
Didn't have an apartment. I had 2 suitcases. I stayed with my sister for about 3 weeks while I tried to figure out what I was doing.
Right.
Eventually found an apartment, switched jobs a few times. I think the thing that blew my mind the most when I first moved here was just jaywalking. Like,
Sure.
I remember my first day going to work. Our office was like right near Penn Station, and I was waiting to cross 7th Avenue, and just everyone just started going, and it was like the light was still red, the thing was still
Sure.
like don't walk.
Sure.
And I was just like in awe of these people who just decided it was okay to walk against the signal. Got used to that very quickly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Same.
But I remember that was my first moment of being like, oh, it's different here.
Yeah. That's how I started when I first got here. I was like, blend in as much as possible. That became sort of my thing. So, and I figure if other people go, you can use them for cover if somebody doesn't break or something like that.
It's like, just don't be the last one to go.
Yeah. But you took to New York pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would say, especially once I got my apartment and I started to settle in. I will say my first job in the city was, it was tough. I wasn't really making friends, and I was kind of having trouble, finding what my social circle would be in the city.
Sure.
And I think also because I moved so quickly from when I decided I wanted to move here, it took a while for kind of the homesickness to set in, and like just the thought process of like, oh shit, I just moved across the country from my entire family and all my friends.
Yep.
But after a while, things really picked up. I started doing improv, which I had totally opened up my social circle and
And that
so
was
many
at the
things.
Pit?
Yeah. So I had seen, let's see, I got here in September. And then I think in January, I saw my first improv show, which was North Coast. Amazing hip hop improv group. If you're in New York and haven't seen them, definitely do it.
Yeah, I've never gone. The idea of
You've never gone?
I've never.
Will.
I don't even really quite get what hip hop improv is, other than when I would go to theater festivals, and sometimes there was an improv game called the Beastie Rap where you would rhyme in the style of Beastie Boys.
Yep.
So that to me is what hip hop improv is.
Okay, you know what improv is, right?
Yes.
Okay, so imagine two people are doing a scene, and then suddenly they start rapping, and there's a beatboxer.
Okay.
And then they rap for a few minutes, and then they edit the scene, and then you start a new scene.
Oh well, that sounds interesting.
It's so good. You have to go.
And North Coaster, they're like the best.
They are the best.
Awesome. Well, then I'll go.
Yeah. I just remember being so blown away, and I had never done improv like in Arizona. I don't know if there were opportunities for improv.
Yeah, probably not many, if any.
Yeah, and so I decided, let's sign up for a class. The Pit had this like level 0 class, which was 4 weeks, no class show, like super low commitment, and signed up for that and kind of fell in love, and then gave the Pit thousands of dollars for more classes.
Sure.
Fell down the rabbit hole with improv.
So improv, that was your first kind of foray into comedy performance?
Yes, that was the first foray into performance. Did that for a long time, had an indie team, performed with for a couple years, and started doing some stand-up maybe summer of 2017. Kind of got out there. I'd done stand-up once or twice in Arizona, but never anything good or worth remembering.
Where at in Arizona?
It was like a coffee shop, had like an open mic.
Okay.
It was like 3 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon or something.
Cool.
Not a lot of people interested in hearing comedy at that time of day.
I can imagine not. I did a show in a vegan restaurant in Baltimore with no microphone in the middle of the day for this.
Oh.
I thought it was part of Arts Fest, but it was part of some. It was not.
Trying to do stand-up without a microphone in any situation is just, I don't know what it is, but it's just...
because that's the microphone and the context of stand-up is one of the few things separating you from just being a stark raving lunatic on the street. And I once did, I did like a comedy festival where there was no mic at the show. And I was just like, what? It kind of broke me.
Yeah.
a little bit.
It is so interesting though, like how pivotal the mic is to stand up. And even if you're in a room where the acoustics are fine, everyone could hear you. There's something about when the mic is I kind of want to say it's like a safety crutch, but it's not, because it's really okay. Here's what I'll say. I know I'm rambling a bit.
Oh, it's all good.
I think the mic is like your wand. Like you're a wizard, and the mic is what gives you kind of this secret comedy, spiritual, ethereal power that flows through the mic, and that's what makes it stand up.
I can I could vibe with that.
I just came up with it, but I think I am pretty smart for that.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It gives you the power and like the I'm the one here because the audience doesn't have a mic.
Yeah.
So I'm the one with the mic. I'm the one in the lights. I'm the center of the attention. I'm the boss of this situation. And then the entire set is, depending on how good the crowd is, fighting to maintain that.
Right. Absolutely.
is what I think. Granted, most of the shows, the crowds at the pit are generally very cool. I've never had to duke it out.
Oh, really?
with the crowd at the pit. I've never had to go in on a heckler and be like, your parents failed you. You are a disappointment. like I've never had to do that or like, fuck yourself 6 ways to Sunday, and I'm going to list off all of them.
I've seen an improv show get heckled at the pit.
Really?
Yeah. Oh man, who was it? I think it was Lovers, who was this a house team at the pit a few years back, and this I don't know if this guy was drunk or what, but he like came in. We're on the striker, and I was watching it, and this guy in the back just started talking. I don't even remember what he was saying or why he was saying it. And one of the improvisers was just like, "Oh, did we leave the dog in the attic again?" or something. And you could kind of hear like they kind of like played with this whole thing. And then just like throughout the set, they would like keep referencing it or something. And it was a very good way to handle it. But I remember just thinking like, I've never heard an improv show get heckled before.
No, neither have I. Have you ever done improv and gotten heckled?
No.
Because my only basis for that would be, did you ever see Ted?
Yes.
Okay, so the improv scene where Mark Wahlberg and Ted are in the back just shouting, 9/11, Robin Williams on 9/11. No, nobody said Starbucks, pal. Robin Williams on 9/11. Hey, we're throwing you gold. You got to do that to me is the bad audience.
I've definitely gotten plenty of those suggestions.
Yeah, the like, hey, someone give me a suggestion. Blowjobs. Oh, yeah. Well, it's like that's all shit that I dealt with in like 6th and 7th grade when we were like just learning what like improv was and like.
I think you're saying we were just learning what blowjobs were.
Well, probably that too.
About the same time.
Yeah, about around the same time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, my favorite thing, and I don't know if this is what form this is. I don't know if this is considered the Herald or not. But did you see Don't Think Twice?
Yes.
Birbiglia's movie. I'm in it.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
What's that story?
So I was an extra in it. If you go back and watch the scene where it's the show where Keegan-Michael Key's doing his character from Weekend Live. I got some tickets here. And you can see me very visibly laughing in the crowd of the improv show.
Where was that filmed? Was that
was filmed at I'm pretty sure it was the Cherry Lane Theater where Mike Birbiglia does lots of his stuff, and it's where Career Suicide, where Chris Gethard did that.
Yeah, because
it was down in the Bowery. I definitely know that.
I think that's where he did Thank God for Jokes.
Yes, that's where I saw Thank God for Jokes. So how that happened is I was on his email list, and he sent out a blast to like, I'm looking for extras. I'm filming a new movie, looking for extras. If you're a union, go here. If you're non-union, go here. I was in between jobs at the time, so I was like, yeah, why not? I'll go. That's how I got to be in Birbiglia's movie.
Oh, that's so funny. I saw that movie I think like 3 times in theaters.
It's really good. It really affected me emotionally. Like I had it showed me a lot of my fears, and then it showed me lots of ways that you can where the dream can also not be the solution.
Right.
And then also how you can find your own solution that is satisfying, which to me is Chris Gethard's character in that movie.
Yeah.
He is the guy who he doesn't attain the dream that everyone in the group is going for, but I think turns out he makes a bad situation the best it can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I don't think I'd ever thought of that interpretation of it, but that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad we could talk about that movie. That movie.
I don't get to talk about it much. No one really brings it up these days.
I mean, I enjoyed it very much, and I'm not just saying that because I got to be in it. Like I watched it and was like, he did a really good job on this, and I think he did. I think what he started with Sleepwalk with Me, he built on with Don't Think Twice.
Absolutely.
So I really enjoyed that. So in that movie, Gillian Jacobs asks, "Has anyone had a particularly hard day?" and then they start a scene based on that. Is that considered a herald? What is that?
I think that's just a suggestion. You can get, it's called a get, or, what's the question you ask in order to get your suggestion.
Okay.
And that can really be anything. I think on my indie team for a long time, we'd ask like, what's something you're passionate about? It's really just figuring out what you need to get inspired and to kind of get something going. The Herald is a very specific form of improv that involves very specific beats and very specific timing and all these different things. Whereas, what you do your show based off of in terms of suggestion isn't really as applicable to the form.
Right. To me, the Herald is like expert mode. Like that's where like the hardcore masters of the craft of improv go. That's what they do.
It's interesting because, the Herald came out of Del Close and the whole improv scene in Chicago. And it's
Right.
UCB's basic, signature form these days. And so like everyone at UCB, and I think even at the Magnet, learns the Herald as kind of like the definitive improv structure. But the Pit doesn't teach the Herald. Like the Pit specifically avoids teaching the Herald because they
Right.
think it locks you into a specific form too much and you get in your head, which I think is true for some people. The thing is, if a Herald's done really well, it works.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like it just works. It's a formula that works. Whereas if you kind of have a looser structure, there's a little more room for failure, which can be good or bad. But I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the Herald in terms of performing it. But when you see one that's done really well, even if you have no idea what it is, it works. It's like, and going back to music, it's a lot of, you may not understand why music sounds good, but when you listen to it, you know that it does.
Yeah.
And if you see a good Herald, you don't necessarily know what's going on and what these different beats are, but you know that it's funny.
Yeah, exactly. Same way like good stand-up, like you're not thinking about the form, you're not thinking of joke formula or story beats in a good humorous story. You're just enjoying it.
Right.
And you're just in it. You're not analyzing it.
Yeah, you're not like, okay, that was the setup. Okay, so now they're about to do a punchline. Okay, great. Punchline. That was funny. Okay, maybe they'll do a tag now. Okay, like,
Yeah,
okay, what's the
exactly.
next transition? Okay, they have officially started into a new topic. It's
exactly.
Yeah, once, and that's the goal of every performer is you don't want the audience to be analyzing your material like that. You want them to just enjoy what you've spent time creating.
Yeah. And you were on an indie team at the Pit for a while?
Yes. So not necessarily at the Pit because we were indie.
So you were just lots of places.
Yeah, so we're Just Gravy. We formed in January of 17 and then played together for over 2 years with a pretty consistent cast. A lot of people who I'm still really good friends with, and it was just an awesome experience. We rehearsed together weekly and performed all over the city and met so many great people and had awesome coaches that we worked with. And you teched many of our shows.
Yes, I did.
And I think that's probably how we met.
I think it is.
I think Paul Cohen would have asked you to tech one of our shows, and that would have been the first time we met.
I believe so because how I basically got it in my head. I would enjoy teching shows at the Pit, be a little extra money, and that could be a nice break from the stand-up world. So I teched a couple grad shows. Chris and Mike were at one, and I have just teched with them for 3 years, and then I have teched. I've all of the offshoots of Backdoor Barbecue. I've teched as well. Like I've teched Just Gravy, and then I've teched Paul's stuff, and I've teched stuff for you. Thank you, Ronnie Pascal, for showing me the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is exactly how we met. And then I didn't know you did stand up, and until you texted me like, "Hey, can you tech my stand up show?" And I was like, "What? I didn't know Nick did stand up."
Yeah, stand-up's definitely newer for me. I would say I only started doing it seriously maybe like March or April of this year.
Yeah.
I took a really great stand-up class at Brooklyn Comedy Collective. I had quit my job and was just kind of taking a few months to like learn who is Nick Cohen.
Sure.
And, took a stand-up class. Amazing. It was taught by Artie Galliputi, who's one of the funniest comics in the Brooklyn indie scene right now. And started going to a bunch of mics and performing a lot and getting booked on things. And then eventually, with all my connections at the Pit, started producing my own shows at the Pit.
Yeah.
Which I love producing stand-up because it's really an opportunity to give people you think are funny like a chance to get up and perform. And it's always fun, and whether I'm hosting or finding other people to host, it's just always a blast the actual night of.
Oh yeah, 100%. And your shows are super fun. I've gotten to do some time on your shows.
Yeah, we had a comic drop last minute, and I was like, "Well, Will does set, Will does stand up."
Yeah, 100%. It was super. That crowd was super hot. So it was it was really great to get up there and fire off some jokes. It was a good time. And you're good. And also your sketch, your improv shows that I've talked for you, they all have kind of like a through line to them as well. Like it's the corporate retreat thing, or
right?
Like I like that aspect of putting together improv as well. It's not just like here's a team, there's the next team, blackout.
Yeah, I think there's so much that's just disjointed that when you're able to put something together that kind of has a through line, I think that helps a lot. And again, going back to storytelling, it's like when you listen to a great album that all the songs don't necessarily flow into each other, but they fit each other thematically, as opposed to just like 10 random songs strung together. Yeah. It's a more pleasant experience, and the more you can kind of tie in all these disparate ideas, I think it's fun, and it's fun for the audience too.
I think so. Is there something that you want to create that you haven't yet, and what is it?
Yes. I spend a lot of time starting ideas and not finishing them. I'd say the big thing for me is I really want to make a sitcom.
Okay.
I want to make a 13 episode, 21 and a half minute sitcom that would be, made in conjunction with my friends and people who I just love working with, and, a writer's room of really funny people. I think that's an idea I've had working for a while, and, I have a few different ideas that I'm putting out there. But trying to put that together has been really fun and something I really want to keep working on. I started doing sketch comedy within the last year or so. And so I think that's given me a really big bug to keep writing and performing and editing and, finding people to work with. So I think that's driven me into that area quite a bit.
3 camera or like a single camera?
I probably single camera. But I would say that's more for logistical reasons of having zero budget in New York than anything.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Cool, man.
I've gotten really into The Good Place lately, and
me too. That show is one of. There's a scene in the 3rd season that made me laugh so hard I almost stopped breathing. I couldn't catch breath.
Oh,
it was so funny to me.
We'll talk about that off mic to avoid spoilers.
Yes, 100%. Good Place. Very well written, very funny.
Yeah. And if you're a fan of the show and aren't listening to the Good Place podcast, you need to immediately start doing that.
Ooh.
Because every episode, Mark Evan Jackson, who plays Sean, interviews different cast members or crew members, and they talk about the episode. And it's just like a really great deep dive into the behind the scenes of the Good Place.
Oh, that's such a cool idea. I'm going to have to start listening to that.
Yeah.
Did you ever watch The Office, and are you listening to Office Ladies?
Huge fan of The Office. Office Ladies is downloaded on my phone. I have not started listening to it yet.
Understand completely.
Yeah. So inundated by podcasts. We haven't even talked about podcasts really. But
no, we still got time to talk about podcasting.
Yeah. So I don't know. What was I going to say?
We haven't talked about podcasts. You like The Office, have it download on your phone. Haven't inundated with podcasts.
Yes. Okay. Edit this out, Will. All right. Here we go.
All right.
And start again now. Yeah. Podcasting has. We were talking about earlier about kind of my relationship with podcasting, but
yes.
I had mentioned that I quit my job and wasn't doing much for a few months, and then actually, while I was looking for something new, had someone from a podcast company that I really enjoyed reach out to me, and they were looking to hire someone, and I was looking for something new, and it kind of just worked out very nicely, and found my way into the podcast industry. which has been amazing. I'm working primarily on the advertising side of things, and just getting to meet so many amazing people who, kind of built podcasting from the ground up, been in the industry for so long, access to hosts and producers and editors, and getting to kind of touch the whole world of podcasts has been so awesome for me.
Yeah, that's been my experience also. Like the people in the podcasting industry love what they do, love making the thing, love making podcasts, love talking about it. So it's been really great for me as well to be able to work to see that side of the industry as well. Just after I feel like being out in the woods, like honing my skills, like in comedy clubs and Googling YouTube tutorials and teaching myself how to record things.
Yeah. It's podcasting is still such a new medium.
Yeah.
And I really think we're still in the infancy. Like it's still going to keep growing and booming. And as screens continue to disappear from, our lives, as, the rise of smart home assistants like Alexa and Siri continue to grow, I think we'll start having less screens around us, and that'll only open the opportunity for more audio content.
I think so.
And it's a really great opportunity for people to start getting in. Also, it's just really easy to make a podcast these days.
Yeah, it really is, and it can be about literally anything.
Yeah.
If you go to your favorite podcast app and just type in like dentist, you will find so many podcasts about being a dentist.
Yeah. So I co-host a podcast, the Serial Thrillers. You were actually guest number 2, I think. I think you were on our second episode.
Yes, I was. I was just going to say I was a guest on your podcast with Paul Cohen.
Yes, Paul Cohen, who we are talking about again.
Yes, he's been on the show. A lot of people really enjoyed when he was on the show because we just nerded out about pop punk for like.
Oh, I can imagine. It's interesting. We've had a couple episodes that we've done where guests have been really into pop punk, and them and Paul just kind of like start going, and I just sit there like quietly nodding my head.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yes. I've heard of Blink 182. That's about where my knowledge ends.
And I like the conceit of your show. At first, I thought, okay, I wouldn't, because the idea of your show is that the guest picks their favorite childhood cereal, and that's sort of a window into talking about your life. And I'm curious what if there have been any kind of interesting revelations that have come through the medium of cereal that get you into your show.
Yeah, so I want to quickly talk about like the history of where the idea for the show kind of started and wound up. So the idea originally was there's this great show, I think it was a Nerdist show maybe, that was Mike Lee and Black and Tom Cavanaugh, called Mike and Tom Eat Snacks. And
yes, I remember that show.
I personally think it's the greatest podcast of all time because it's so simple. It's such a simple idea, and the two of them are such comedic geniuses that it's incredible. But the basic gist of it was they kind of sat around as heightened versions of themselves. Listeners would send them different snacks. They would eat them. They would rate them, and they would review them. It was very funny. It was never serious. They were always sarcastic, but it was so good. And when I was kind of thinking like, oh, like I kind of want to do a podcast. What would my podcast be about? I was like, oh, what if I made a podcast called Serial? And it was, instead of cereal, like, the true crime. Yeah. It was cereal, like the breakfast cereal. Oh, and then we could kind of do it where it's like we rate and review cereals. And then we discovered that there are already like 3 or 4 podcasts that do exactly that.
Sure.
And so I was originally working with Gabby Jordan on the idea, who is a fellow comic, who's also our first guest on the Serial Thrillers. And she and I were kind of going back and forth on the idea, and we were like, oh, is this a character show? Like, are we having guests come on as characters and rate and review serials with us? And the idea wasn't quite there. And then there were some scheduling things, and she dropped out, and I was talking to Paul about it, and Paul was like, oh, that's something I'd be interested in. And so then Paul and I kind of reworked the topic from the ground up and made it less of like a character thing and more of just like an actual interview style show.
Yeah.
But the thought process was cereal is one of those breakfast foods that we like think so much of our childhood when we think of them. that what would it actually be like to use Serial as a jumping off point to talk about people's childhood and their nostalgia and kind of all these different things that come with it. And that's really what the idea wound up as, which is obviously very different than what it started as.
Yeah.
But it's been a blast. I think we've done probably 20 episodes so far.
Awesome.
And hopefully going to record a new season soon. So.
That's great, man. That's spectacular. And I had a great time being a guest on your show. I think we talked about a lot of stuff that I don't talk about a lot because usually I'm on this side of the conversation. So it was cool to be the guest and to get to talk about that stuff. If you were going to be a guest on the show, I think this will be a great way to close it out. If you were going to be a guest on your show, what cereal would you pick?
Oh man, it's interesting because I probably would have chose Reese's Puffs, which is what my sister chose when we had her on. Because I mean that was one of those cereals that just really defined my childhood.
Yeah.
Always eating it. I'm obsessed with the combination of chocolate and peanut butter, and so I think that episode was really special for me, not just because my sister was on it, but also because I got to eat my favorite cereal.
Yeah.
So I think I probably would have picked that. Yeah.
Excellent. And you're going to start recording the next season relatively soon?
That's the goal, got to work out some scheduling things, but, hopefully get it back up and moving soon.
Awesome. And you say you've done around 20 something episodes?
Yeah, I think there's about 20 episodes out right now. Find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castro,
Podcoin if it's still in existence.
Podcoin. It might be on Podbean somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Pretty much if you can't find it on something, let me know and I'll get it there.
Awesome. And I always like talking to you, Nick, and I always like when I get to see you when I text when you call me to tech shows. And I always like just seeing it just in regular life. So it was great to talk to you, man. So thank you so much for coming over and doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Will. This was great. I'm a big fan of the show, and so it was an honor to be on.
Oh, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Well, anytime you want to come back, we'll chop it up about something else.
All right, we'll do it next week.
Excellent.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you, Nick.
All right, thanks, Will.
Okay, folks, that's our show for the week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Nick for coming over. I appreciate your time. And if you guys want to keep updated of what Nick has got going on, I will have links in the description as well as links to his podcast with Paul Cohen's Serial Thrillers. And of course, you can check out my episode of that. If you enjoyed this podcast and think you might know someone else who would enjoy it as well, we are available wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. You can share a link with a friend, and I would greatly appreciate it. I also want to give a shout out to my producer give a shout out to my supporter on Patreon at the awesome producer level. Mary Beth Mooney, thank you so much for your support. I sincerely appreciate you supporting me on that platform. If you guys want to check out some of the stuff that I have going on exclusively for Patreon supporters that I don't post anywhere else, you can go to patreon.com/awesomedisaster. That is patreon.com/awesomedisaster, and check out some of the exclusives I have over there. And I will and I am keeping the main show here free. I'm not putting episodes behind the paywall or anything like that. I want to create new stuff for people who support me over there, and I want to keep this show available for anyone who wants to listen to it. So thank you guys again for checking out the show and for listening. I sincerely appreciate it. I hope if I don't hear from you before the holidays, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Hope you eat well. Hope the political arguments are to a minimum and everything goes well with you. So thank you guys again for being here, and I will see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everybody.